Hello and welcome to PCM's Webinar Wednesday. We are thrilled to have you with us today for our webinar on VMware's software-defined data center. Joining us today is Ryan Conley and Brad Gilpin from VMware. We're going to get right into our main presentation in just a few minutes, but first I have a few housekeeping items. Please enter your questions in the question box on the right-hand side and I will relay those to our speaker this morning at the end of the presentation. We do send out a survey at the end of the webinar. Please fill it out and let us know how we did as well as topics you'd like to see covered on future webinars. You should see that survey in your inbox later today. Speaking of future webinars, please be sure to check out our weekly webinar schedule on our website at www.pcm.com/webinars. This is a live webinar and recorded broadcast which will be available for playback in just a few days. Recordings are posted to our webinars page along with our upcoming webinar schedule. There you can also find our previous webinar recordings. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our main presentation today. I'm happy to hand it off to our speakers today, Ryan Conley and Brad Gilpin.
Hey team, this is Ryan Conley from VMware. Give you a little background. I was in IT for 13 years, working in a variety of roles. I got my start in education, then was a consultant for 7 years, and most recently worked for a hedge fund in San Francisco. I joined VMware 3 years ago, working as an SE for the San Francisco Bay Area markets, and then recently, as VMware has continued to add field count to support customers, have become a solutions consultant, which means I focus my time on assisting SEs with strategic customers in the West.
Thanks, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brad Gilpin. I'm a cloud management specialist for VMware. Essentially, my role as a product overlay is to understand and help drive business value from a cloud management and software-defined data center perspective. I support Ryan as well as our core field reps that you may or may not have been in contact with up to this point. But once again, thank you all so much for joining us, and really excited for this presentation and hope that everyone gains as much as we do from it. Thank you all.
So today is going to be a mix of both presentation and live demo. As we run through this, please feel free to post your comments or questions in the chat. And we have dedicated 15 minutes at the end of the hour to focus on a discussion around answering those questions. So with that, we'll get started. As the next admin, I can comment on some of the challenges that come up with the cloud era. So I was hired to work for a hedge fund in 2012, moved to San Francisco, went through the process, virtualizing their entire infrastructure, consolidated from 5 racks down to 2 racks, dramatically improved the time provision, server and other workload resources. But with that led to new challenges. Security is top of mind for most customers today. So having an application-centric security model that's inherent at the data provisioning, as well as continue to consolidate costs while removing technical debt, but all while also improving both the operational efficiency of IT, but also empowering IT to meet the business needs. And that could be a speed challenge, that could be a technology challenge, or more often than not, it's a people and a process challenge. So VMware's approach is to be very open and supportive, integrating in multiple systems. As a software vendor, we kind of have the privilege to working with a variety of pieces of hardware from compute, network, storage, as well as different security appliances, network appliances, but empowering you, the customer, to make decisions based off policy and governments rather than having to manage individual components at their end. So VMware has designed this, what we call the software-defined data center. That is one of our key messages of the last 4 to 5 years, the other being hybrid cloud. And ultimately our goal is to empower you, the customer, to have single tools that are more than just point solutions. Instead, have a much larger approach at managing both your hardware, your management plane for your workloads, your servers and applications, as well as tying into the different hybrid clouds that you may be integrating in your environment, so Azure or AWS or Google, all within a single dashboard. So this is a high level of one of our key methodologies today. We started out with just the compute. That's where we made our bread and butter in the early 2000s. And now we've expanded to over 80 products throughout the data center. And those could be for application analytics, business analytics, for deciding which workloads are better suited to run on-prem, or is it more cost-effective to go to a public cloud model, or to help you manage kind of the day two operations of your data center. So automating the deployment of network and security components, or analyzing to better enable you to troubleshoot your environment. So this is where we see customers today. Most start on the very far left. I gave my own personal story of when I moved to San Francisco of virtualizing our workloads. But with that brought new challenges, new areas. As networking and security move deeper into the data center space, moving away from physical workloads into virtualized workloads, or just provisioning differences. What used to take 2 weeks to provision a new server can now be accomplished with a right click of deploy from template in a couple of minutes. But that also led to VM sprawl. You had traditional vendors from an application standpoint who were recommending far too much memory, far too much CPU. That led to operational inefficiencies. And so what we're trying to do is empower customers to make smarter decisions for both deployments, automate the process as much as possible, but then also give you the data and analytics to go to your superiors, back to your business and say, hey, you really don't need 16 gigs of memory, you only need 12, or hey, if the business is requiring a new project, it's going to have 10 servers. That has a real cost. This is not the cloud, it's free model. So then you can go and reappropriate those services to the correct business unit to help avoid IT as being a cost center, all while enabling the business to run at the speed that it needs to be successful in the market. So starting with just an operational analytics aspect, a key challenge that I faced as an admin was different business units requiring different pieces of software. DBAs, for example, are usually looking to focus on just their world, which could be Oracle or SQL, MySQL. You have the networking teams. They might be siloed out looking at their Cisco or Palo Alto Networks hardware. You have their storage teams that are just looking at their NetApp or their EMC or their Nimbles. And then you have the traditional IT operations teams that these days are largely VMware-centric, managing their vSphere environment. So you have siloed teams that aren't always communicating with each other, but more importantly, they're using different tools to manage different problems, all without communicating amongst each other. You also have a lack of cost. So like I noted earlier, you have a new project that comes about. IT is being asked to foot the bill for that project, even though it might be empowering a different business unit, all while trying to manage an overload of different tool sets, different alert storms. I'm sure if you've ever been an admin and you've been on call, you can relate with that. So the goal is to have a single methodology approach. So bring in different tools, all within a single dashboard, to enable both proactive management of the environment to avoid downtime, but then in the event of an incident or an error or an alert, to very quickly be able to troubleshoot down into not just the virtualized infrastructure, but then also to the physical infrastructure. Because more often than not, those items are correlated. So this is an example of the default dashboard. We're going to stick the slides here briefly and we'll jump into a demo. But this is actually my lab environment. This is the default page that I see when I log in. At the very center, an area of focus these days is uptime. I'm starting to see a trend as I speak with customers where they have MBOs that are set on the uptime of their environments. Moving away from ESXi host uptimes, because those are not very relevant, but the actual cluster or data center uptime. But we also see just very high metrics, what's running, but then on the right we have an alert volume. This is an analytics engine that's ingesting data, but it's also understanding trends. So it's not going to overly bother you with alerts. So if there's, for example, a backup server that runs every week and does your fools, the first time it's going to run, it's going to alert you that, hey, you're seeing disk activity, high network activity, high compute activity. But as that process runs the following week and the following week, it's actually going to understand, hey, this is a process that we know is going to run and it's not going to bother you. At the bottom, we have some quick hit metrics of what's running and where. So we're looking at what VMs are my top offenders for CPU. We have memory in the center, and then we have disk latency on the right. And one thing that we've tried to build is, again, a single dashboard approach is integrating both the log analytics and now also the business analytics. So we're tying in multiple solutions to give you quick access, but then we're also integrating into our core platform, vSphere, which has been around for many years now, is more often than not core to the efficiency of the teams. So as we've added features to vSphere, what we've done is we've started integrating these products together. So now we can access them from a single dashboard, but now we also have these products communicating to each other, so a better together approach. So as we've built in or expanded features on vSphere, such as distributed resource scheduler, we're now feeding those data metrics into our operational analytics. And so what we can do here, here's a quick example. As an admin, I had multiple ESXi hosts, but I would always want to try and balance out their memory, for example. And so that used to be kind of a manual process, as I just wanted to be a little bit more paranoid on how much slack space I had on each available host. This is now a setting that's built in. So we have our operations analytics assessing what our workload capacity is, and then we have it communicating with vSphere features, which is distributed resource scheduler, and now we can actually manually tee up a rebalance to balance out what was before unbalanced, and after we can forecast what the results will be. Or if you have a maintenance window for an evening or a weekend, you can also schedule that. So building on the better together, we can also take the operational analytics of the capacity management, and as we get to the later demo, when we start looking at automating the deployment of workloads from a fully featured, VM running a database server with all the configurations, or an actual application stack with multiple machines with multiple workloads running, we can take the data that we're assessing from the operations analytics and pipe that directly to the automation. So those workloads are deployed to the exact hosts or the exact clusters that are most balanced as an end result. So again, thinking outside of just the traditional vSphere workloads, more often than not when you're troubleshooting, you need to look at the entire data center from a holistic aspect. And this more often than not includes logs. And so you may or may not be aware, we added a product called Log Insight for every vCenter edition. So you can now pull in 25 log streams for every license of vCenter. And these are not isolated to just VMs or virtual machines. These could be your firewalls, physical firewalls. These could be your physical switches. This could be the actual physical host, your Dell or EMC HP. Also your storage arrays, or even your individual applications that are virtualized or non-virtualized. But the goal is to give you a single log engine to then assess those workloads, again, to help you be empowered to more quickly troubleshoot and make those operations more efficient. And as you see, we have different marketing terms, but the main thing that I want to advocate for is we're trying to be very open and supportive of a variety of products. So for this example, we're now pulling in log data from Tomcat or our Cisco Nexus switches, our Cisco UCS blades, even Active Directory Exchange. But these are what we call management packs. And we have them available for a variety of these solutions. And so there's an actual marketplace that you can download these and install them. And then you have tailored dashboards, which this is a dashboard, to more quickly troubleshoot in the event of an incident. The next item that we've added integration with from a Better Together story is the business management. So the ability to take in cost modeling or reporting to better empower you to understand, hey, this application, for example, might be high CPU or high network egress. And more often than not, public clouds charge you more for that. So this will give you the ability to forecast or look at real time in terms of what the costing is going on in your environment today and determine where are these workloads better suited to run in terms of a cost metric. Or if I want to do a comparison, is it more cost efficient to take these from on-prem to a public cloud? Or lastly, is it more cost efficient to run, let's say, an AWS over Azure or Azure over Google? So this is reaching outside of just tech and looking at, hey, what is the operational efficiency from a cost standpoint? How can I be better stewards to the business? Or how much is this business unit costing us? So we have a project for a new set of database servers for a development team or a new legal application. How much is this legal application going to cost the business? So that show-back approach to help empower you to be more empowered to go to your CFO or your VP and help them understand that when you buy this new storage array or when you expand your environment with a piece of software or a new application, you're not doing it to just because as an IT you like new tools or new toys. You're actually doing a project that's then going to empower another business unit to more often than not drive revenue for the business. So with that, we'll take a break from the slides. We'll switch over to a live lab. So This is an environment that's running. This is from the operations aspect, and we'll kind of dive into the other items. But this is when I first log in. The default page is what we call recommended actions. So these are items in your cluster you may want to pay attention to. I can see here from a quick high level, we have a color approach. So green light means go. Yellow is, noted. We also have amber and red, which is going to be a more serious alert or error that you can quickly troubleshoot. I can click these individual actions and it'll take me to that error as well as all the related components. Or if I'm looking at more from an overview aspect, I can look at my environment in kind of a summary. So again, I have data centers involved, the different vCenter clusters, the amount of VMs. I have trends associated with that, so I see that my VM count is trending up. But then also from a reclamation aspect, I can see how many VMs are powered off. Are those projects that were stalled and delayed or maybe canceled? So taking up storage space, which is more often not very expensive for the business. And then moving down, I can also see at my environment in more detail. So I can always select different objects to tailor what I'm seeing for those objects. But here on the center, I see my uptime. I also see I have an alert volume, so I can understand that starting on the 15th, I have something going on. So I have 8 critical issues. I have 7 immediate in terms of this is more pressing, and then 30s are more general warnings. Looking down at the bottom, again, I have my top 10 offenders for disk latency, memory consumption, and CPU. So this is how I could quickly get an assessment on, hey, how's my environment running? Or if I want to jump into the critical issues, I can quickly click them and dive into just those items. From a capacity planning, this is an item that comes up as environments mature. You have more VMs that are being provisioned. More often than not, there aren't the appropriate controls. So policies that govern what workloads are provisioned, how they're provisioned, where they're provisioned. Typically, I see about a 25% reduction when we start adding in different solutions to rein in those controls. So you, the IT, can help be better stewards of your resources and also better stewards of your cost. But you can also, by reclaiming resources like CPU or memory or even disk space, that can help delay additional costs. So by removing VMs that are powered off, removing VMs that are idle, or even right-sizing VMs that have been over-provisioned because the SQL server for this application vendor says it has to have 32 gigs of memory and 8 virtual processors. And more often than not, particularly on the CPU aspect, right-sizing those VMs will actually make them more efficient. And for example, I as an admin had SolarWinds running in my environment. Junior admin set it up, and inside of the actual database server, you'd over-provision the CPU resources, which was leading to significant performance requirements. Performance impact. So by right-sizing that VM, I actually increased the performance of that database VM, as well as reclaimed resources that went back to the cluster. Another quick high-level example on the main page is just a balance. So as we saw on the PowerPoint slides, this is an overview. I can select the data center on the left, and I can understand, is this balanced, is this not balanced? If I was going to integrate it with Distributed Resource Scheduler and vSphere and I wanted to do a placement, I could then schedule that, set that. And then another key item that this is also taking note is, what's my vMotion trends? So if you're not aware, Distributed Resource Scheduler is moving workloads within your cluster. There's a couple things that it can do, just base and vSphere, as well as it integrates with Operations Manager. So as with vSphere, when workloads are provisioned, Distributed Resource Scheduler, or DRS, will determine where are the best hosts for this workload to balance or to land so that it'll be balanced. And there are different settings from aggressive, regular, more aggressive, or we can tailor down to less aggressive. And those will lead to more or less vMotion events. So we can keep track of that trend, which can sometimes have an impact on larger performance VMs, depending on how your vMotion configuration is set. So this gives you hindsight into what's going on in your environment. Moving to the Better Together story, as I was talking about earlier, Log Insight is the syslog aggregator. Now, if I'm in a troubleshooting scenario, this is where I could do a quick search. I can tailor, human-readable searches as opposed to machine-readable. I can tailor time frames. If I want to look in the last hour, the last 24 hours, or so a certain date, And then I can also very quickly, if I have, let's say, an IIS event that I know triggers another failure, I can very quickly save this search to a custom dashboard right here. The dashboards are what I referenced earlier in terms of there's default for the vSphere environments, but then we also have these management packs. So for example, this is a UCS management pack that's installed. I can see that by default, these dashboards are created out of the box, and I can look at UCS manager events or different profile events. I can even dive into specific dashboards that are for applications like Tomcat, Active Directory. But more often than not, you really want to get an idea of what's going on in your greater environment. So this enables you to quickly look at the metrics for specific applications, specific clusters, or even specific pieces of hardware like Palo Alto or EMC. Lastly is the business analytics. Again, these are two areas that were not in the previous release. We now have a single approach to enable you to more quickly look and manage from both day one and day two. So as we were talking about earlier from a costing perspective, you now can quickly assess the overview of the environment. What does it cost to run my entire environment? Or if I want to dive into different business units, different data centers, I can look at my total cost or start diving into different expenses within. So for example, if I'm going to look at charges, I can very quickly get an idea of what are my charges to date, what does the trend look like over time if I want to dive into different monthly analytics, or I can start looking at what individual projects are costing the business. I then can do reports. So for example, if you want to generate a report for, let's say, a director, a VP, or a CFO, these are out-of-the-box reports that you can generate for them to help show back where the costs of the business are going to, and you can directly tie those projects to the different business units. So for example, I, as a customer working in finance, we had a development team that needed a group of SQL servers. So at the time, it was SQL 2012 or 2014. And so I had to create 2 VMs, load SQL on them, and those had real costs from a Windows Server cost, a SQL Server cost, per core or per seat. Had to do a count on which model was more effective just to save money. And the CFO was giving me a hard time about, why are you spending 20 grand for this, small project? And but at the end of the day, I didn't need that project. That was actually for a certain development team who were then providing an application for a set of traders, and those traders were predicted to make, $2 million. Making an assessment on, which commodity were they going to purchase over the next. So it wasn't that IT needed, those servers and those applications deployed. It was that a different business unit needed that, so then they could actually make, money for the business. Speaking of costing and spending, one area of interest these days is, as we look at the hybrid cloud approach to running workloads on-prem, or running workloads in public cloud solutions like Azure or AWS. But as I noted earlier, different workloads run better in different environments from a cost perspective. So in some scenarios, you want to have all, there could be privacy concerns. You have to run everything on-prem. Other scenarios, I have a customer in Texas that is deploying all across the world, and they use this tool to determine, is it more effective to spend the money on hardware once and deploy it locally, or is it more effective to start in a public cloud model, such as Amazon or OVH or Azure, and then as that customer base grows in that region, then expand and actually do private cloud deployment. So this tool allows you to pick individual projects and do costing to see which one is more effective. Again, the public cloud models are usually going to tax you on the higher CPU or the higher network egress traffic. So those types of workloads are usually more cost-effective to run on-prem, whereas your web traffic and other items that aren't high on resources may be more cost-effective to run in public cloud. Ultimately, this tool is allowing you to have a solution that gives you the analytical data to make real business decisions based off data, as opposed to shooting from the hip or just guessing which one, for example. So you can empower your business teams to make more effective decisions. So jumping back and kind of keeping with the software-defined data center theme, another key area of interest these days is the network components. So it's one of the last items in the data center that really hasn't changed much over the last 20 years. Security is top of mind as we look at the most recent breaches. determining what happened, when did it happen, are usually the biggest items. Target, for example, had an intrusion detection system, but they were getting the alerts, but they didn't know what was going on, and they didn't know what users took, and they didn't know how they took it. So having the ability to have transformative insights in terms of both the physical underlying infrastructure as well as the virtual infrastructure is key. So for example, I have customers using different solutions to map out their SAP environments. So determining which applications within SAP are talking to which applications and on what port so that they can lock it down. Or which section of SAP is holding the PCI data, because that now has to be under compliance for PCI and has to maintain compliance. So tools that can assess which workloads are talking to what and on what port to enable them to move towards the zero trust approach, which most are calling micro-segmentation these days. But all while ensuring that you're having the best practices for availability as also the health of the environment. So an example of that is Network Insight, which again can map both east to west traffic within the data center very quickly from reporting, as well as what's going out of the data center, and then also give you those visual diagrams. So at what point did the packet leave the VM to the host, to the network, to the top rack switch, and then go back down to the other host and VM to communicate. Or if you want to look at a more descriptive detail of what ports that they use so that you can start planning out your firewall rules. And that's really what's kind of next on the list is, from a changing aspect, is how can businesses improve the efficiency of the network components? So today, I was speaking with a customer yesterday, one of their biggest change management process delays was regarding the network. So anytime a new workload was created for a new application set, they had to provision a new VLAN. That required a support ticket to the network team, who then had to create the VLAN, and that just creates time. So time to provision, but then also time to manage and troubleshoot. So as a virtualization administrator in my past, I much preferred logging into a single dashboard to manage all of my components, whether it be compute, network, storage. I'm used to creating virtual networks or logical switches that are virtualized, as opposed to logging into disparate pieces of network hardware to make changes. So what we're seeing in the market is groups are moving towards a more software-defined approach. That is not to say that the network admins do not have very valuable skills. Those skills are still very relevant and needed today. I speak from experience as largely a server and virtualization administrator who is a jack of all trades, dealing with network and storage and security. We still very much need those people and their experience to design these systems and manage these systems, but instead of doing it on a more manual physical approach, we're empowering them to make these changes via software, validate it once, and then publish it throughout the entire data center, as opposed to managing different pieces of hardware or maybe change it in this switch and then go into this switch or this firewall, etc. And what that empowers us to do is have a more secure and robust approach at managing the data center. Instead of having security being a second or forethought, having it be at day one. So inherently secure by validating on the front end, and then you can automate that process. So once it's been validated, you can then have the stamp of approval from the security team or the compliance team, and then automate that process. So the next time a request comes, that network can automatically be provisioned, automatically have all the security controls in place, and the end users can get their either applications or the workloads more quickly to more empower the business. So just a quick high level in terms of integration. The partner ecosystem, particularly on the network security front, is very robust. Specifically when we start talking about third-party introspection, Palo Alto Networks was one of the first to the market in terms of integration with VMware, but we've also expanded. So now all of the next-gen firewall vendors are on this list. We also have more detailed analytics from Gigamon, as well as third-party introspection from Rapid7, Symantec Trend, et cetera. And this list continues to grow. So as vendors want to have a more integrated approach, we're working with all the vendors who want to work with us. Again, we're trying to be very open and supportive to ultimately prepare a better solution for you, the customer. So moving outside of kind of the operations aspect and moving more into automation, Usually the first step in the maturity model is IT automating IT. So as an admin, I'll make fun of myself a little bit. I was more often than not the guy who had a big whiteboard behind me with a list of projects. And on that list of projects was actually deploying an automation platform. And I never got around to it. There was always too many fires. But the goal here is to help me help my team first. So deploying a SQL Server is pretty time intensive from, I can right click and deploy a new server via template, but that takes 5 minutes. That's not a challenge. The challenge is then installing SQL, configuring SQL, making sure that's a consistent configuration, making sure that's a secure configuration, making sure it has all the appropriate updates, etc. And then I can actually put that workload into use. So the idea is to move away from the more manual processes that are usually time intensive or just tedious, and enable you to focus on the projects such as documentation or other items that cannot be automated, that need to be done but rarely have the time to get done, and take away the more remedial tasks that are just more time intensive but aren't necessarily valuable. So again, our vision here when we start talking about automation is that hybrid cloud approach, the software-defined data center approach, so provisioning to any cloud, Google, Amazon, Azure, OVH, Rackspace, you name it. Any application, these could be hybrid, from a virtual machine or even in some of the next generation applications such as cloud native, but also doing it from any device. Funny story from any device is we actually have a product manager that can provision workloads from his Apple iWatch, which I think is pretty neat. But ultimately, those who've been using our web client, I know it's come from a more painful approach to a more new and robust HTML5 approach. That move is specifically to enable all users to manage their environment from any device. So whether you're on an iPad or Android tablet, a Linux machine, a Mac OS, or Windows. So this is what kind of most customers are under from if they're on a smaller side. I myself had a group of engineers who would walk in, knock on my door, knock on my desk, say, hey, we need a couple projects. And then that was a manual process. Other groups, depending on the maturity level as they move up, they may be using like a service desk approach. So ServiceNow, for example, Cherwell, these are more calculated deployments. I was speaking with a customer last Thursday who had a methodology like this. But the downside of this approach is their goal was to be very secure, but in doing so, the compliance team had created significant bottlenecks for the business. So while the IT team had templates that they could right-click deploy from, and that took maybe 5 minutes, the actual full process from service request entering, going through the change management process to actual deployment was 2 weeks, which, as you can imagine, was causing some delays for the business. So what we're now proposing is a different solution of, instead of doing these manual deployments, if you know you're going to do something more than once, why not automate it? So work with the compliance team, work with the network team, work with the security team, work with a different application team like a DBA, determine the needs, and then blueprint that out is what we call it. So the ability to have either multi-machine blueprints is what we call it, where you would have a traditional web application database, or just single machine blueprint that could be a web server or a database server with just those application components loaded. The ultimate goal here is to make it a one-click approach. So do the work once, validate it with all the necessary parties, and then from there, make it very repeatable for consistent and secure deployments. So with that, we'll jump back into a demo. As I said, I'm going to try not to kill you with PowerPoint. But this is VMware's cloud management platform. We can see here just high level, we have a main dashboard where you can look at what was deployed and when. This could be tailored for different users. So there's different business units that may need different solutions. And so, for example, I'm logged in as a cloud admin who would have access to everything, but you would typically tailor down the approach. So, for example, if you had a help desk team that focuses on creating users, or let's say Active Directory or creating Exchange mailboxes, you could tailor down their view to just those items, so to empower them to do their jobs more effectively. We're going back to the IT automating IT. You may want to just have simple infrastructure services. So these are all blueprints, but have been pre-configured with a certain version of Linux in this flavor and these components, or a CentOS box that has integration with InfoBox for IP address management. Or if we want to add a different machine for Puppet, or if we want to have a Windows server with certain IIS components. And this is starting small, and then you work your way up from there. So if you want to start building a more elegant solution, you could, for example, go to databases. Again, my SQL Server reference of having a very consistent, secure, and repeatable deployment of SQL Server 2016. And then as you mature, you can move up to multi-machine blueprints, which would have multiple servers deployed with multiple applications. And again, the end result is a point-and-click approach to where you click request, and everything is validated and generated on the back end to where the user just clicks request, and then they get what's generated is exactly what they need to do the business. And these examples have been all virtual machine approach. One thing I'll point out is we do have support for containers as well as container hosts. So the ability to provision virtual container hosts and then deploy individual Docker applications, for example. We also have a dedicated set of, it's a project called Admiral. It's an open source as well as it's integrated into the solution. So you could very quickly provision hosts from this portal. You could even give development teams access to just this portal if they don't need everything else. Again, you want to tailor what they're seeing specifically for their job role. So from here, they could add hosts. They could also deploy different applications from templates. Again, one-click approach to provision, and the generated output is exactly what they need. So lastly, really the next steps to getting started is, if you have different projects or use cases, that's usually what I would recommend focusing on. So for example, I had a team locally who needed a PCI compliance for the web portion of their application. That was a project that they focused on. Others may have projects where they need to automate the provision of resources. So automation is a high use case for either IT streamlining the efficiency for themselves, or as they mature, streamlining the efficiency of the actual business units. The other, I was speaking to a customer yesterday was actually application continuity. So the ability to automate both the day one, so having consistent network and security policies across multiple data centers, either in active-active or active-passive, and tying in that better together story with your disaster recovery software. So when you make a network change, for example, or a firewall change, making sure that that's automatically created on the secondary site. So if you add a new workload at your primary site, and that new workload has a new network, for example, to segment it out, that would automate the process of creating that network on that secondary site. Lastly, things that I'll float is I'll be the first to admit as an ex-VMware customer for 5 years, VMware training isn't cheap, but we also have a lot of free resources for customers. So one, if you've ever attended VMworld, we launched a program called Hands-On Labs. This enabled you to get actual live demos that you can interact with. You can break them, log out, etc., and just log back in and restart. Those are now freely available online. There's over 400 labs that are available for you, the customer. They are constantly updated, usually on a quarterly basis, sometimes bi-quarterly. So for example, all the labs are being ramped up for VMworld at the end of this month, and then those new labs will be published after VMworld US and VMworld Barcelona commence. But those are free training tools that you, the customer, can leverage to either test drive new software, do a POC with an actual live environment without having to stand up the hardware on your end, or if you actually just want to get hands-on experience with a different solution. Lastly, we also have social lab workshops. These go across the US for a variety of subjects, so whether it be in user computing, network and security, automation. Those are all free, again, to you, the customer, and they use those live hands-on labs that I referenced earlier. So with that, I know we're almost out on time. George, if we want to switch to Q&A, I haven't seen anything pop up in the questions or comments box, but if we can start taking questions, and then we can focus on, a valid discussion for the users.
Okay, no problem. We do have a couple questions, and the first one goes,
Excellent.
Yeah, how does VMware measure quantifiable impact?
That's a good question. So for example, if you want to hand me back the ball, I can show you an actual dive. So the quantifiable impact could be a couple different things. That could be, very commonly, I'm seeing like directors and different users being asked to show, hey, what is the uptime for the business? So That's something you can quickly show via this tool here. If we look at the actual operations overview. If we want to ask the impact of, let's say, a consolidation project, that's a numbers question. So how are you impacting the business to save that money? So that's something you could very quickly do through business analytics. So this project consolidated hardware, and we can look and see what was the impact. Just loads here real quick. So we can look at, see, what did it cost before, what did it cost after. If you want to look at individual showback results, we have reports that we can generate. Or we can also do what if. So what if we take this from public cloud to private? For this project, we can see it was costing us, for example, $1387. Now it's costing us $509. And this is a demo lab, so you may think they're dummy numbers, but you actually plug in your VPCs from Amazon or your Azure account. So these numbers are actually coming straight from the vendors. So when we start talking about what is the quantifiable impact, those are the real data that you can then show back to your superiors or your C-level executives.
All right, thank you very much. The next question is, how long does it take today to process and provision a new resource project or a new resource request?
So, yeah, so kind of going back to, that's going to vary by customer. So for this user's environment, their individual change management is usually the big process there. So I was speaking with a customer last Thursday, and like I said, they could very quickly provision a VM. That's not a problem. But more often than not, it was the actual configuration, and that configuration, let's say for a SQL server, that there's time involved to install SQL. It's time involved to document all the configurations that you make on SQL. And then for every change, if you have, let's say, a compliance team, they may have mandates. So getting outside of technology and talking more people process, the process is usually what adds time. So I had a slide where I was showing, the actual service desk requests coming in and then going to different bodies. In this case, this company had a breach. As a result of the breach, they beefed up their security. They added both headcount for the security team, added different compliance standards. But ultimately, that created roadblocks. So for every change, let's say for a new network that gets created, a new firewall rule that gets created, or a new VM that gets created, it had to have an approval, and that requires time. That user's not at their desk, or if they're not at their inbox. So that adds time. So if you can validate with those teams, so have a secure process to, let's say, make sure every database VM that gets created goes on a selective network that's been pre-approved, has firewall policies that are pre-approved, has these configurations that are validated from a security aspect, has the appropriate updates. If you can do all that on the front end, now you can automate that process and streamline the time it takes to get those workloads provisioned.
And gentlemen, this is Brad. So kind of to piggyback off of what Ryan just mentioned and showcased was that we run into customers a lot of times that they have a challenge of, they want to focus more on being proactive. So what we try to emphasize to them is spend time being proactive, creating templates versus being reactive to a typical process that your organization may take 4 to 6 weeks to provision new resources. So that's kind of, I think, the point of this particular attribute to the product is let's spend time more on creating templates and blueprints and less time becoming reactive and going through approval process. Ryan, would you agree?
Yeah, again, it's more often than not, this isn't the field of dreams approach, particularly when we start talking about infrastructure as a service. You need to actually meet with the different business units, determine, hey, what are your needs, validate those needs, and then that's where these blueprints come in. So you do everything all at once, have them sign off on it, and then they know that when they request a different workload, let's say like a WordPress application, they know that everything that's generated is exactly what they need to do their business. So it's got the
I got one more
that they need. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you
all
off.
the individual software components that they need. So these have been blessed. They've been validated. The security team signed off on what network they go on, what firewall rules, what security group, etc.
All right. I got one last question for you. What cost analytics tools are you leveraging today to measure private and public cloud?
Okay. So we actually, I already had that tab open. So we have a business management tool. It's just very simply called Business. But that is an analytics engine that's ingesting costs from the industry. So we work with different, let's say Deloitte, Gartner, et cetera. Those costs are piped into this tool twice a year. But then those are for default industry trends. So you have a plus or 5 aspect to that. But then I, as an admin, I know that, let's say I had an overview, just give you an overview. I could look at, I know I bought my storage at the end of quarter or end of year, and I got a smoking deal. I bought my Cisco network hardware at the end of year. I bought my NetApp or Nibble storage end of year, and I got a smoking deal. I can then adjust those expenses to tailor them down and to make these reports more accurate. But this tool will give you the ability to look at the individual cost and see how much it's costing to run the business from a monthly basis or a daily basis, yearly basis, et cetera. And then you can modify, let's say, the storage cost to further match what you actually paid for those hardware. Or if you have hosts that are, you've already written them off the books, you can modify that. But ultimately, the goal is to give you a more accurate overview of how much it's costing to run, whether it be on-prem, off-prem, or if you want to do an actual comparison like we were looking at earlier from a what if.
Okay, guys, that was my last question. If anyone has anything else, I'll leave the floor open for you. And with that, many thanks to our speaker, Ryan and Brad, and thank you all for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out at www.pcm.com/webinars for on-demand recordings and for our upcoming webinar schedule. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you again for future webinars. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.